There are moments, oh, there are moments when the heavens seem hushed, when our prayers rise like smoke and vanish into the empty air, when the God we've trusted, the God we've loved, feels far away, a shadow just beyond our reach. And in that silence, the heart trembles, the soul whispers, why? But let me tell you something, dear heart. Silence is not absence, stillness is not abandonment. When the night is long and the answers don't come, that is when faith rolls up its sleeves and goes to work. When the road is dark and the map is blank, that is when courage digs in its heels and says, I will trust anyway. Because sometimes God's silence is not a closed door, it's an invitation. An invitation to listen deeper, to hope fiercer, to lean harder on the promises that have carried generations before us. It's in the quiet that we learn the difference between fair weather faith and the kind that stands unshaken in the storm. So if you're waiting, if you're weary, if the silence has been your unwelcome companion, remember this: the same God who parted seas, who shut the mouths of lions, who brought life from barren wounds, that God is still writing your story. And sometimes the most powerful chapters begin in the quiet. Now let's walk into this truth together. Let's find the strength not just to endure the silence, but to rise from it louder in faith than ever before. There are times when the heavens feel like brass, when every prayer you send up seems to bounce back unanswered. When the God who once felt so near, so real, now seems hidden behind a veil of quiet. And in that silence, the heart grows heavy. The mind races with questions. Have I been forgotten? Does he not hear me? Why won't he speak? Let me tell you something, my friend. Silence is heavy. It presses down on the chest like a stone. It makes the night longer, the days harder, the soul weary. You cry out, you beg, you wait, and still nothing. No voice, no sign, no miracle. Just mere silence. But here's the truth. Silence does not mean God is absent. Think of a mother watching her child take their first steps. She doesn't rush in at every stumble. She doesn't shout instructions with every wobble. Sometimes she stays quiet, not because she doesn't care, but because she knows her child must learn to walk without her holding them every second. Her silence is not neglect. It is love. It is trust. It is belief that her child is stronger than they know. God's silence is like that. When he is quiet, it does not mean he has turned away. It does not mean he has stopped listening. It means he is giving you room to grow, room to trust, room to discover that your faith is not built on feelings, but on the unshakable truth of who he is. Think of Joseph in the dungeon for years. Think of David in the caves running for his life. Think of Job sitting in ashes begging for answers that never came. The silence was thick, the pain was real, but God was working even when they couldn't see it, even when they couldn't hear him. And he is working in your silence too. Maybe right now you're in a season where nothing makes sense. The prayers you've prayed 1,000 times still hang in the air. The breakthrough you've waited for hasn't come. The healing, the provision, the miracle, it's all delayed. And the weight of that silence is crushing. But what if God's silence is not the end of your story, but the making of it? What if this quiet is where your faith is being refined, where your patience is being stretched, where your trust is being deepened in ways you couldn't have imagined? Because faith isn't faith until it's all you have left. When the music fades, when the emotions run dry, when the signs and wonders are nowhere to be found, that's when real faith rises. That's when you learn to say, even if he doesn't answer, even if he doesn't speak, I will still believe. That kind of faith doesn't come from mountaintops. It comes from valleys. It doesn't come from constant miracles. It comes from long nights of wrestling with silence and choosing to hold on anyway. So if you're carrying the weight of God's silence today, hear this. You are not alone. You are not forgotten. You are not being punished. You are being prepared. Every tear you cry in the quiet, he collects. Every prayer you whisper into the stillness, he treasures. Every step you take in the dark, he sees. And one day, or one glorious day, the silence will break and you will understand. But until then, keep trusting, keep hoping, keep believing, because the God who seems silent is still sovereign. The God who seems distant is still working, and the same voice that spoke light into darkness will speak into yours. Wait for it. Wait with courage. Wait with faith. The breakthrough is coming. There are days when faith feels like a flame burning bright, when your spirit soars and your heart sings with the nearness of God. You pray and the answers come swift. You worship and the presence falls thick. You believe and the miracles unfold before your eyes. But then there are the other days, the days when the fire flickers low, when the heavens feel like stone, when your soul aches for a sign, a whisper, a glimpse, and all you meet is silence. What do you do then? What do you do when faith isn't a feeling anymore? When it's not the rush of joy in your chest, not the warmth of assurance in your bones, not the easy certainty that used to carry you. What do you do when faith becomes a choice? A hard, stubborn, grit your teeth and hold on choice. You keep believing anyway. Because faith was never meant to live in feelings alone. Feelings change like the wind, here one moment, gone the next. They rise and fall like the tide, unpredictable, unreliable. If your faith is built on feelings, it will crumble the first time the storm hits. But if your faith is built on something deeper, something unshakable, then no storm can take it from you. Think of Abraham, old and childless, staring at the stars. God had promised him descendants as countless as those glittering lights, but years had passed and still no son. His body was as good as dead. His wife Sarah's womb was barren. Every feeling must have screamed at him to give up, to call it all a lie. But Abraham didn't look at what he felt. He looked at who God was. And so he believed against all hope, against all reason, because his faith wasn't in his circumstances. It was in the God who never breaks a promise. That's the kind of faith that moves mountains, the kind that stands when the world shakes, the kind that says, even if I don't see it, even if I don't feel it, I know my God is true. Maybe right now you don't feel God's presence. Maybe your prayers feel hollow, your worship feels dry, your hope feels thin. Maybe the enemy is whispering in your ear, where is your God now? Why bother believing if nothing changes? But listen to me, this is where the fight is won. This is where faith goes from being a fair weather friend to a battle cry. This is where you prove to yourself, to the heavens, to the forces of darkness, that your trust in God isn't based on what he does for you, but on who he is. You don't serve God because he gives you miracles. You serve him because he is worthy. You don't follow him because the path is easy. You follow him because he is good. You don't love him because he answers every prayer the way you want. You love him because he loved you first. That's faith beyond feelings. It's the faith of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego standing in the fire, declaring, our God can save us. But even if he doesn't, we will not bow. It's the faith of Job, covered in sores, mourning his children, still saying, though he slay me, yet will I trust him. It's the faith of Jesus in the garden, sweating blood, begging for another way, and still surrendering, not my will, but yours. That kind of faith doesn't come from happy emotions. It comes from a heart that has decided, no matter what, God is worth following. So if today your feelings are failing you, if your heart feels numb, if your spirit feels weak, don't panic, don't despair. Faith isn't gone just because the emotions aren't there. Faith is still there in the choice to pray when the words feel empty, in the choice to praise when the song feels hollow, in the choice to stand when your knees are shaking. That's the faith that pleases God. That's the faith that changes things. That's the faith that outlasts every storm. So keep going, my friend. Keep trusting, keep believing, not because it feels good, but because he is good. And that's enough. That's always enough. There is a kind of knowing that only comes in the darkness, a wisdom that can't be learned in sunlight, but only in shadows. When the night is long and the answers don't come, that's when the deepest lessons find us. When God seems silent, prayers go unanswered, when the road ahead is hidden, that's when we discover truths we could never have seen in the light. Because darkness has a way of stripping everything away, all our pretenses, all our easy answers, all our shallow faith, until all that's left is what's real. Think of a seed buried in cold black earth. Above ground, nothing moves, nothing changes. It looks like death. It feels like failure. But underground, there's a quiet miracle happening. Roots push deeper, strength gathers. Life prepares to break through in ways it never could have if the seed had stayed in the light. That's what God does in our darkness. He's growing things in us that can't grow any other way. Patience, endurance, a faith that doesn't depend on signs and wonders, a hope that isn't shaken when the miracle delays, a love for God that isn't based on what he gives, but on who he is, the lessons of the dark. Moses learned them in the wilderness, 40 years of waiting before God called him from a burning bush. David learned them in caves, running for his life, writing psalms of lament even as he held on to promise. Paul learned them in prison, chained and alone, yet penning letters that would change the world. And you're learning them in the quiet, in the waiting, in the not yet. It doesn't feel holy, it doesn't feel purposeful, it just feels hard. But God doesn't waste a single moment of your darkness. He's teaching you to hear his voice in new ways, not in the earthquake or the fire, but in the gentle whisper that comes when all other noise has faded. He's teaching you to walk by faith, not sight, to trust his heart even when you can't trace his hand. He's teaching you that his presence isn't dependent on your perception, that he's just as close in the silence as he is in the shouting. These aren't lessons you can learn in victory laps, son. They're forged in the fires of waiting, in the sweat of wrestling, in the tears of longing. So if you're in the dark today, if you're straining to see, begging for answers, wondering if God has forgotten you, hold on. You're not in the dark because God has left you. You're in the dark because he's doing something in you that can't happen in the light. Every tear you cry is watering something holy. Every prayer you whisper is carving out space for glory. Every act of trust, no matter how small, is building a foundation that will outlast every storm. The dark won't last forever. Morning always comes, but while you're here, while the night still lingers, let it teach you. Let it shape you. Let it show you the depths of God's love in ways the light never could. Because one day you'll look back on this season, this hard, holy, aching season, and you'll say, that's where I met God in ways I never could have anywhere else. And that, my friend, is a lesson worth learning. There is a holy hush that falls in the wilderness places, a sacred quiet where the noise of the world fades, and if you listen closely, you can hear the faintest whisper of God. When the path is barren and the road is lonely, when the answers don't come and the silence stretches long, that's when heaven leans in close, not with thunder, not with fire, but with a whisper so tender, so true it can only be heard when everything else falls away. You see, God doesn't always shout. Sometimes he speaks in the language of the unseen, in the quiet nudges, the sudden peace, the unexpected provision that arrives just in time. He speaks through sunrises that steal your breath, through the kindness of strangers, through the verse that leaps off the page as if it was written just for you in this very moment. These are the whispers in the wilderness, the reminders that even when he seems silent, he is speaking. Think of Elijah in the cave, running for his life, convinced he was the last faithful man standing. God could have sent another earthquake, another fire, but instead he came in a gentle whisper, not because he wasn't powerful, but because he wanted Elijah to lean in close, to listen deeper, to discover that the God of the miraculous is also the God of intimacy. And you may be in your own wilderness right now. The bills are stacking up, the diagnosis is frightening, the loneliness is crushing, and you're straining to hear anything from heaven. But what if God isn't ignoring you? What if he's inviting you to tune your ear to the subtle, the sacred, the small? Because sometimes the most profound truths aren't found in the dramatic, but in the daily. In the scripture that comforts you at 2 a.m., in the friend who calls at just the right moment, in the inexplicable strength that rises when you thought you had nothing left. These are not coincidences, these are love notes from God. The world tells you that if God were real, he'd prove it with spectacle, but God, he often chooses the quieter way, the way that requires faith, the way that demands you pressing close to hear his heart. Because faith isn't just for the mountaintops, it's for the valleys too. It's for the moments when you don't feel him, but you choose to believe he's there. It's for the seasons when the only evidence of his love is the breath in your lungs and the promise in his word. It's for the wilderness, where what you learn about him becomes more precious than any answer he could have given. So if you're wondering today if the silence is deafening, if you're desperate for a sign, slow down. Listen, the wilderness isn't just a place of testing, it's a place of encounter. Moses met God in a burning bush in the middle of nowhere. Hagar, abandoned and afraid, discovered God sees her in the desert. Jesus, led by the Spirit, faced his greatest trials in the wilderness and emerged in power. Your wilderness is not your ruin. It's your rendezvous with the God who has been whispering your name all along. So don't rush through this season. Don't beg so loudly for answers that you miss the whisper. Because the God who parts seas also quiets souls. The God who raises the dead also revives weary hearts. And the same voice that spoke light into darkness is speaking over you now, softly, surely with a love that will not let you go. You are not alone. You are not forgotten. You are being led even when you can't see the way. And one day you'll look back on this wilderness and say, that's where I learned to recognize his voice. And that, my friend, is a gift worth the journey. There comes a moment, oh, you know this moment, when the weight feels too heavy, when the road seems too long, when every step forward takes more strength than you think you have left. The voices whisper, just quit. What's the use? The fatigue settles deep in your bones, and the dream that once burned bright now feels like a distant flicker. This is the crossroads where faith meets its truest test, not in the starting, but in the continuing. Not in the sprint, but in the marathon. This is where courage is born. Because courage isn't the absence of fear. It's not the lack of doubt or weariness. Real courage is what happens when you're terrified, when you're exhausted, when every logical reason says to give up, and yet you take one more step anyway. You get up one more time. You try one more time. Why? Because deep down, beneath the questions, there's a stubborn, unshakable knowing that says, my God is with me, and that's enough. Think of Ruth standing in a field of loss, her husband gone, her future uncertain, her heart broken. She could have turned back. She could have chosen the easier path, but something in her refused to quit. She clung to Naomi, to hope, to the unseen hand of God guiding her. And because she did, she became part of the greatest story ever told. She didn't know it then, but her courage was writing history. Your courage is doing the same. Every time you choose to trust when the money isn't there, you're building a testimony. Every time you choose to praise when the pain won't lift, you're silencing the enemy. Every time you choose to love when you've been hurt, you're mirroring Christ. This is the courage that changes things, not the flashy, dramatic kind, but the quiet, gritty, I will not let go kind that Noah had when he built an ark while people mocked. The kind that Esther had when she risked her life for her people. The kind that Paul had when he kept preaching, even in chains. They didn't know how their stories would end. Neither do you, but they kept doing. And because they did, God moved in ways they never imagined. Maybe right now you're running on empty. Maybe the dream feels dead, the battle feels lost, the fire inside you feels like it's down to its last ember. But listen to me, the story isn't over. The God who fed Elijah with ravens, who guided Israel with fire, who raised Lazarus from the dead is working in your life right now. Even when you can't see it, even when you don't feel it. So take a deep breath, straighten your shoulders, and keep going. Not because it's easy, but because He is worthy. Not because you're strong, but because He is. Every step you take in faith is a declaration to hell you lose. Every prayer you whisper in the dark is a seed of victory. Every act of obedience, no matter how small, is moving you closer to your breakthrough. You are stronger than you think. You are closer than you realize. And this season of struggle, it's not your downfall, it's your setup. Because the same God who allowed the test is preparing the triumph. The same God who saw you through yesterday will carry you through tomorrow. So don't stop, don't quit, don't you dare give up. The world needs your courage. Heaven is cheering you on. And one day, one glorious day, you'll look back at this moment and say, that's when I discovered what I was really made of. Keep going, warrior. Your finest hour is just ahead. So here we stand, at the edge of understanding, at the brink of revelation. We've wrestled with the weight of silence, learned to trust beyond feelings, discovered treasures in darkness, heard whispers in wilderness places, and found courage we didn't know we had. But let me leave you with this burning truth, my friend. God's silence is never His absence. What if, just what if, His quiet is the most profound answer of all? Not a rejection, but an invitation. Not abandonment, but the sacred space where faith grows roots that can't be shaken. The same God who seemed silent while Joseph sat in prison was positioning him to save nations. The same God who appeared quiet while Esther fasted was preparing her to change history. The same God who stayed still as Lazarus' body decayed was about to perform His greatest miracle yet. Your story isn't over. Your breakthrough isn't cancelled. Your prayers aren't unheard. They're being answered in ways you can't yet comprehend. So the next time heaven feels silent, remember, the teacher is always quiet during the test. The general is most silent before the battle cry. The composer pauses before the crescendo. This isn't your ending, it's your elevation. Walk out of this place with your head high and your hope unshaken. The God who brought you this far isn't about to fail you now. Your season of silence is about to erupt in a symphony of glory. Now go live like you believe it.